So I guess I'll get started. It's 9 o'clock. People, I'm sure, will continue to filter in. Thanks for showing up today. And thanks especially to those who went out to karaoke last night. I think it's quite an achievement that you made it out here at 9 a.m. this morning. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is creating interactives that are as dynamic as some of the websites that are out there, and tell you the story of how we as an agency got to where we are building a lot of our interactives with web-based technology. So just a quick sort of show and tell of who I am. My name is Brad Baer, and I'm creative director at Blue Cadet. We're a 40-person digital agency in Philadelphia that works on everything from websites and apps all the way up to large touch walls and touch screens. So to begin with, the story I need to tell is that we, 2-3 years ago, we were doing about 50-50 work, big interactive or big institutional websites was half the practice, and then the other half was larger in-museum interactives. So we had this discussion. We said, okay, there's a lot of people out there doing websites. Should we concentrate solely on the interactives in the museum? And we went back and forth because we had this discussion all the time. And we thought, well, maybe if we concentrate, that'll make us, a better agency, a better shop. So we said, okay, which one do we want to do? And what we realized was that being both is actually a very good thing. And we sort of made the bet that each of these technologies for these different areas, we're going to start informing each other more and more. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how they really have started informing each other more and more. The other thing that we were considering was the fact that consumer-grade technology was getting better and better. So the fact was that people were playing around with iPads and tablets and other surfaces, which were really fluid and worked very, very well. So when they would come into the museum, if you had these clunky interactives, it was actually a downgrade from what they were doing at home. And this was a very bad thing. So jumping ahead to today, and part of the reason why we've kind of believed this bet has paid off is that there's something that's now referred to as a headless CMS. Has anyone heard of this term, headless CMS? Okay. So if you want to really get into the weeds of this, this is an article written by our tech director, Mark Librera, about what a headless CMS is. But essentially what it is it's using a content management system and separating that from what's actually rendering out the interface that your visitor or user is seeing. So what we typically do is we use Drupal or WordPress as a backend because they're really easy to use. It's essentially like creating a blog for anyone who's done that. We filter through the content or data feed, which is JSON, and then we use these different methods of actually rendering it out, and that's what the person sees on the other end. So Cinder is a C++ platform that we use quite a bit. You can render this out in iOS or Android. And then the HTML5 sort of suite of things, which is JavaScript, Angular, which is a really powerful tool, and then React is another one. So again, I'm not like the tech whiz-bang guy at Blue Cadet, so I have very limited knowledge. But what I can understand about all of this is that it's become a really powerful tool that makes it very easy to update a lot of these interactives that were usually really, really hard to update. So today, to talk to you about this and show you examples of these, I'm going to use 4 projects. The first is a project we recently completed for the Florida Humanities Council. The second is a series of digital orientation stations for the Field Museum in Chicago. The third is a series of projects for the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And then the fourth is the Hoover Mason Trestle, which is in Bethlehem, PA. So I'll go through these relatively quick. If you have any questions along the way, just raise your hand and ask me. So this project, the point of it was when the Humanities Council came to us, they said, we are really small councils. Some of us are 2-3 people, and we really can't update and kind of maintain digital, but we want to have it. We realize we need to have some sort of ways of reaching out to a younger audience. So what they were seeking to do was create an interface that allowed each of the humanities councils to have some sort of digital, but to be maintained by a single point of contact, which is the larger statewide Florida Humanities Council. The other benefit about this is basically that because it's web-based, it's much easier to update and access everything. They don't really have people that know how they can go on, and even the simplest little task of updating an interactive was way beyond most of their staff members. So now from their single point in Tampa Bay and St. Petersburg area, they can continually update these things. The other benefit about all this is we created an interface in a way so that each of these smaller councils, they could really simply upload photos or stories, and then they're all going to the central database where the team can then decide, okay, this is actually a really interesting story that someone in Bartow, Florida is telling. We want to include this on the larger interactive. The example you're seeing right here is for a statewide initiative about water, which is something that obviously impacts the entire state. So they're picking these themes, a different theme every year or 2 years, and then kind of building up the knowledge and the oral histories about that topic. The other benefit about this, when you design it with a CMS as a backend, is that it's really, really flexible. So you can not only display it on a screen or a touch table or kiosk, you can project it, you can display it on an iPad, and it becomes much easier as opposed to saying, sorry, we only designed it for one size. We really can't make it smaller if your museum's a small museum or bigger if it's a bigger museum. Second project we'll talk about is the Field Museum. And these are digital orientation stations, which essentially is a wayfinding tool. And if you've ever been to the Field Museum, it's gigantic. It's very, very big. The other thing is that in the course of any given day, their offerings change. So they might have tours some days, but not others. They might have speakers or movies or special exhibits. So it's never sort of a one-size-fits-all thing. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to be able to use a content management system to add events that were happening really, really easily. The other benefit about this is that we're showing things that are time and location-based responsive. So we know where these screens are. We can show things that are closest to that spot, but we can also show things that are happening from that point on. So the example I'll give is that, if you go to a museum and they give you sort of a printout, it shows everything that happened that day. But if it's at 2 p.m., what happened at 11 a.m. or noon or earlier really doesn't matter to you. So we're really only showing them the information that's really most important to them. Basically, people don't want to wade through a lot of stuff. They want to get to the point that really matters to them. And again, they've used this, I think, I can't remember, 9 instances around the Field Museum, and they're sort of piloting it right now, 55-inch screens and 72-inch screens. So you can see this is what the back end looks like. It's very, very simple. And we spent a lot of time designing our back ends to give people flexibility of what they want to do with this. So this is adding a little event, a movie, Titans of the Age, Ice Age 3D. There's some simple options, and they have one person or anybody on their staff can update this, and it's reflected on all the screens across the museum. This is sort of what it looks like. The Field Museum is gigantic, so the big screens, while they looked huge in our office, they actually looked quite well sized within the Mammoth Museum. And just to give you a peek of what it looks like, it has really nice, essentially works like an iPad. It's really, really slick. It's ADA accessible, so we made it so you can flip the map and the content up and down if you happen to be short or in a wheelchair or tall. And things are really constantly throughout the day changing every time you go to see it. The other fun feature that we'll be rolling out pretty soon is that you can send an SMS message to yourself on your phone, and because it is web-based, you can see what you've curated and picked as events and objects that you wanted to see. So there's no app to download, no crazy thing like that. It just simply sends you a phone with a list of your itinerary. The third project is something that just opened up last night, actually, and this is for the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And when they came to us, they said, we have this problem that baseball is constantly changing. Pete Rose is always in the news, and if you know about Pete Rose or not, he got banned from the game for gambling. But literally every single year, if not every month or every week, Pete Rose is in the news because something new comes out, somebody has something new to say, and they're like, we don't want to do this interactive that says, here's why Pete Rose shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, and then all of a sudden he gets let into the Hall of Fame, and they've just wasted all this money on nothing. So instead, what we ended up doing was creating a really easy-to-use backend that allows them to create their own questions, monitor how people are responding to them, and if Pete Rose gets into the Hall of Fame, it's not a big deal for them. The other thing that's really interesting about this is that we based it sort of like if you've ever used iSidewith, it's a political tool where you answer questions and it shows you which side of the political spectrum you line up with. That's how we're essentially treating this. So we're gathering data when people respond to specific points about Pete Rose and showing you if you agree or disagree with other visitors. And then inviting them to continue the discussion online afterwards. So the social media doesn't take place on here. What they found was that people wanted to talk on their pre-existing channels, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, so we're giving them the hashtags that they can go on and continue the discussion with. The other thing that's really fun about this is there's potentially an RFID component where we're going to let people pick out their team in future stages. And once they're able to do that or pick out their allegiance or their location, we can start to connect, if people in specific areas feel one way about Pete Rose and people in other areas feel a different way about Pete Rose, and show that it's not necessarily a binary thing, that people all across the country are very split. The other thing that we did for the Hall of Fame was this environmental media piece, which is this is roughly the size of the screens. It's 4 55-inch screens. And they said, we have all this great video, or the Major League Baseball has all this video, except we never know when we're going to get it. So we may have 3 videos when we launch, or we may have 300 videos when we launch. Obviously, that requires some flexibility. So again, this was built in much the same way that it was built on a content management system. And the thing is that if there's something specific happening, if they know someone's coming, a major delegate from a team or from another country, they can really easily swap in videos so that it seems to be personalized for that person, and then flip it right back once they've left. And the last project I'll talk about is the Hoover Mason Trestle, and this is in Bethlehem, PA. These are old steel stacks where Bethlehem Steel was distributing steel around the world. And it's actually delivered via just a responsive website, but it feels very much like an app. And what we found working with a lot of museums is that apps are great, but they require a lot of marketing. A lot of museums will say they get anywhere between a 1% and 3% download rate of an app, and that's really a problem, I think. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and one of them is marketing. But what we wanted to do is try to reduce the barriers and make it really easy that someone could just pull up a website. They had great Wi-Fi right there. So again, this is all built on a content management system. We're displaying it using Angular, which is one of the technologies I mentioned earlier. And you go around this site and you interact with different things. We created all the the physical signage as well. And it has a built-in audio guide where you can hear stories from the different folks that worked on the steel stacks. And again, in much the same way as baseball, this content is always changing. They're always getting more. So it wasn't something they could just close down. So I guess just in summary, in general, I think the thing is that this is kind of the new norm. One of the biggest criticisms about touchscreens were that they sort of were locked down and you couldn't really edit them unless you knew what you were doing. What we want to do is make it as simple and easy and flexible to add new content as possible. So I'm not going to go through these individually, but I'll share them online, just the different points that we talked about for each of these 4 things. But we're really excited about a lot of the things that are happening with web technology, and we're excited to see where they're going to go in the coming years. So thank you. Any questions quickly? Yeah. Thanks. Sure.
Just talk a little bit about the Florida Humanities Council project.
Yep.
Just how do you deal with the size of assets, the quality you need for a huge display versus other times on websites?
It's a great point. And deep down, it still comes down to having a curator who's doing that. One of the things we did to help them with this process is the Humanities Council is buying video cameras and all these things that they can have better quality, but we also sent them a style guide to say, okay, here's how you should be shooting this video. If you're recording someone who's at an event and they have a great oral history, this is a best practice for background, this is how many feet you should stand back. So we're sort of giving them a guide, but we also build things in there as well. If we know that we're not gonna have great imagery, as in the case is this, we design the interface so that it doesn't necessarily make it look worse, that we actually make it look better. And we use little hatches that we'll put over top of things, sort of like a little dot pattern or dot matrix pattern that makes it look crisper than it actually is. So we're doing a lot of things on the back end that make it look crisper than they usually are. Other questions?
Yeah. So the baseball one, when you talk about there's a CMS behind the baseball screen, is there, if they have other digital channels that have different CMSs, do you incorporate all that into one? Is there a huge outcry for that? Or people just, okay, oh, this is a video wall, so it's a very clean and simple way to manage that, but then there's no crossover. How does that?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely a desire to keep everything that's going on in the museum under the same sort of content management system, and we have the wall and the pivotal stories. Both are on a Drupal CMS, which is the same as their website. So we're trying to create them all together so that it's one language, and when they have someone new that starts, they're only teaching them one thing instead of 3 different approaches. So there's definitely, you're right on there, that's a big trend that we're hearing more and more.
So you just use Drupal twice, though, instead of incorporating it all together?
It's one instance for the new things. Yep. Yeah, it's one instance even though it's 2 different things. Yep.
It is 9:15.
Perfect. All right, cool. Thank you. No problem. Of course, yeah. Okay. We're in New York all the time, actually. We're doing 2 new projects, so we'll stop by next time.
Okay,
Great,
good,
thank you, Deborah.
good.
Appreciate it. Guess I should get my computer too, right?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Dan Davis. I work at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, and I'm here with my colleague, Jim Spadaccini from IDEUM.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about a project that we did for my museum in D.C. That's part of an exhibition called The Great Inca Road, Engineering and Empire. It opened the end of July. And just a little bit about the experience and the exhibition. The exhibition centers on this incredible achievement of the Inca Empire, which is this 25,000-mile road system that they really used as the internet of its day. They were able to move information and things around very, very quickly and manage this incredible amount of space. The center of the road is the city of Cusco, which was the political, administrative, and cosmological center where they managed everything. So when we were planning the exhibition, we knew we wanted to put it at the very center of the exhibition. And the team at that time really wanted to explore using a model of some sort. They were thinking of a physical model and maybe some interactives around it. But we knew we had a lot of data from colleagues who are working, who have been using archaeological and architectural data to try to figure out what the city was like at its height. So you know Cusco, well, maybe you don't know, but Cusco is this incredible place where you see the foundations of Inca buildings and you see Spanish colonial buildings built on top of it. But there's a lot of evidence as to what was there before. So armed with that evidence, we knew that we had enough that we could actually build a digital model. So we soon started to consider using multi-touch table technology to really try to bring alive what the city was like at that time. And at that time, when we looked at all this data, we reached out to Jim and IDEUM, and we did a phased approach. The first approach sort of was to see how we might fit the city, a map onto that table, and start to imagine how it might fit. Jim, jump in if you want to talk about development process. But we came up with an approach that allowed us to explore photographic, video, panoramic assets, as well as 3D assets in a multi-user approach based on the city's layout. And these are some of the early sort of looks and renders at how we approached this. IDEUM did a really nice job of coming up with sort of a visual look to identify the different elements that are part of this experience. And here you're seeing some later renders of what we're planning. One of the significant things that we achieved with this model, Jim can talk a little bit about the development, is an ability to explore the 3D model by taking a tour over the city as a sort of bird's eye view. This again is another a look at the functionality early on. So we did a production trip to Cusco to create these assets. Jim came along and was able to do some QTVR shots around the city. I just took credit for all the stuff that worked and tried to stay out of the way. But we ended up capturing about 17 hours of interviews, tens of thousands of images that were used throughout the exhibition, those panoramics I mentioned. But also we worked with the SI 3D team. So we were scanning architectural elements throughout the city to both for reference for the exhibition, where we were thinking we might use some elements with 3D printings, but also have the ability to add those elements into this experience so you could actually really see the textures and the amazing stonework for which the Inca are so rightfully famous. There's a lot of this going on in these production trips too, taking pictures of people doing stuff, but I guess that just sort of happens. So these are some renderings that we have some colleagues that work out of the University of Tarragona in Spain who've been working for years trying to imagine what Cusco was like at the height of the Incas. So for those of you who don't know, this was an incredibly sophisticated culture, but that was taken over and basically fell in the mid-16th century, about 1530, when Pizarro came in, and the Spanish really just took everything apart, for a lot of reasons to break up the empire, and so there wasn't much left. And about 50 years later, a lot of the cultural knowledge was lost. Although there's a lot of evidence that remains, obviously, for them to work on these sort of renderings of what it was like there. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they had never seen a city that was that sophisticated or that clean before, so they were just amazed to see these buildings clad entirely in gold and incredibly sophisticated hydrology and engineering throughout the city. We really wanted to represent that in this experience, and I think these models help to visitors to understand this. But these are really, as you can see, sort of the early, the research that went into this. And I think one of the, and here we're basically giving IDM, who went on to sort of create the actual model, the textures, the real, as much exact information as we can give them so they can render out the experience.
Yeah, so the models themselves were really remarkable. University of Tarragona spent 8 years putting these things together from various maps, from a lot of walking around Cusco. And I was lucky enough to spend a day walking around Cusco, and we would kind of duck into little hostels, and they would take a look at a wall. And I mean, they literally went through and really tried to reconstruct it brick by brick wherever they could, or stone by stone as it was. And we got this amazing model that they put together in SketchUp. What was interesting was that because they had built on that model so long, and because their expertise was really in archaeology and architecture, the model effectively, from our point of view, in trying to put it into a working application, we had to completely reconstruct the model from scratch. So it became this great reference, but then when we were looking to make the actual exhibit itself, then we took the model itself and recreated it in 3D Studio Max. And I think in the next...
These are
that's
still some of the renderings that they did.
This is one of theirs, and then the last one is, this is one of ours here. And we would do conference calls to talk about stone textures, to talk about the types of materials that might be in certain plazas. There's one plaza in the center of the city where they transported sand from the coast, so we tried to match the color of that. While we weren't looking to, we knew we could never make 100% accurate 3D model. We wanted to make it accurate enough, and there was a lot of discussions just about the look and feel of the model itself.
So we're lucky enough today that since Jim was showing the technology, we have the app here for you to look at. So I won't show you any videos, but there's a lot of content in there to explore, and it's been a very successful part of our exhibit. We really wanted something that drew people in and allowed them to explore together. I think one of the great successes, and we're testing this with Randy Korn and Associates right now to evaluate, but that it provides a social experience for visitors. And it's not social in that we expect people to talk to each other necessarily, although that happens. The table's big enough for people to feel like it's a safe area, it's okay to come up and explore. And also, the UI doesn't have any instructions, so people can really learn from one another. So they see people touch and access stuff, they see what other people are doing. It provides an opportunity for social interactive action, but it really is a real communal experience.
So the other thing we should mention too is the way it's laid out. You'll see that there's the city center, and the city center is in the shape of a crouching puma. And they literally moved rivers to get that shape. And then when we fit that into the table, we wound up with these two corners that were effectively empty, and we also didn't have good research about what was out there. All the research really focused on the city center. So we use those areas to create these fly-through stations. So when you see the application, you'll see that you can basically use these condors that fly through the application and give you 3D tours of the application. So what was interesting about it is, I think when we see people using the exhibit, because this is on an 84-inch table at the museum, the types of use that we see, it's more like a hands-on science tabletop exhibit where you might have a couple of stations. So it's an interactive where there's more than sort of one thing to do, and there's more than one place to be. So there's a physicality about the exhibit that's sort of unique.
Well, thanks very much. I know we don't have much time, so we kind of wanted to burn through that. Please come back to the back, and you can answer some of the questions you may have. But if you have other questions, we're happy to hear from you. Thanks.
Yeah.